right. Hi, Colin. Welcome to the Finite Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for having me back on the podcast.
Yes, we've got a run of returners lately because it's been a good few years since we started the podcast, and we're getting all the favorites, the fan favorites, and you were one of them. So we're kind of going to talk about something along the same lines because the last one did so well. You talked last time about um, what is marketing strategy. And I guess people liked being stripped down to the fundamentals. Today, we're going to talk about something kind of similar. It's how to think about marketing strategy. And we're going to talk about how to be an effective marketer, which I know you say is different from effective marketing, which we talk about more often than not on the Finite podcast. But before we do that, as I always do, I will let you talk a little bit about your career background, how you got into marketing, and where you are now.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about all these topics because it's very close to my heart. So I'm Colin Lewis. I'm a career marketer. If you ask me what I do by trade, I say I'm a marketing guy. I've worked in the UK, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, and even in my home country in Ireland. And it's been across three different industries. I've worked in the airline business. I've worked in the technology, particularly startup business as well. And I've worked in the telco business. And dealt with budgets from up to take 20-25 million dollars, spending a lot on TV, to also having no budget and working in startups and so on. So the full gamut. And that's kind of like if you take sort of my career arc, but it's what I sometimes call my side hustles. I think have been just as interesting, if not more interesting, which is that I started teaching and training in marketing around 2010. I've been doing it for 15 years or so. And I discovered also about 8 or 9 years ago that I could write, which obviously would have come as a shock to my English teachers in school because literacy wasn't seen as my strong point. But it turns out I can write. And probably in the last 7 or 8 years, I've written, I don't know, 300,000 or 400,000 words, which is equivalent to 4 or 5 novels on marketing, marketing strategy, marketplaces, digital commerce, retail media, which leads me to right where I am right now, where I advise retailers on how to set up commerce media or retail media networks. And I also work with brands, very big brands who everybody would know on this podcast, to help them through their marketing strategy, in particular their retail media and commerce media strategy. And that's where I'm at right now. And it's a lot of fun because I get to travel the world and meet lots of interesting people and talk to them.
Just like you are now. That's very impressive, Colin. Thank you for sharing. I just want to quickly ask, what's your most proudest piece of marketing work that you've produced in your career?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I actually split this into two. There's an airline I launched around 2007, 2008, which is amongst the proudest things I've done, simply because that both time, the odds, and budget were stacked against us. And in a sort of just when social media was in its inception, we managed to capture a lot of, we managed to get an aircraft flying above the Pyrenees with its brand new livery, and got a lot of coverage on social media, got a lot of coverage on YouTube, and what have you. So that's one particular moment I'm very, very proud of, because not everybody gets to design an aircraft livery as part of their career. So that's been amazing. And the other thing I'm pretty proud of is I have written every January for the last 3 or 4 years a sort of a state of report, which typically around 10 to 15,000 words. And so far it's getting 30 to 40,000 downloads each year. And it's something of a labor of love. Nobody pays me to do it, and people love it. And so that's been something that I've been incredibly proud of as well.
Yeah, great. You'll have to send me a copy of that report and I can put it in our newsletter. I'm sure our listeners would love to read it.
Thank you. Of course, I am available for sponsorship. So just send me, 1 Bitcoin or something, something small. Yeah.
Just one Bitcoin. Okay, so let's get into it. I know that you see a very big distinction between being an effective marketer and doing effective marketing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that distinction?
This is something I'm super passionate about. in all the conversations talking about marketing, it talks about marketing effectiveness, which really is an outcome based statement. In other words, if I do X, Y will happen. If I put money into a slot machine, something else will happen at the far end of that slot machine. And I think that's kind of like missing a key part of the factor, because the key piece that really matters is to be an effective marketer. And that kind of turns the sort of the finger around not from outcomes to actually kind of pointing at yourself. Yeah. And what I'm really saying here is, if we just talk about marketing effectiveness in isolation, um, it makes a massive assumption that the person who's trying to get those effective marketing techniques, those effective marketing outcomes in play, automatically knows what they're doing, automatically knows how to spend their time, automatically knows that they've got the right skills and capabilities, and that's simply not true. And I think we can all admit this to ourselves. So there's a distinction, and this distinction is important. And I would believe that the emphasis should go on how to be an effective marketer just as much as how to be, how to have effective marketing outcomes.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I guess it recognizes all of the external factors at play in marketing, and even the best marketers can have terrible outcomes, and even the worst marketers can land on a gold mine and yeah, do great marketing. So I guess yeah, it is making it more personal. Um,
It's personal for a number of reasons, because whether we're willing to admit it or not, we all have our own sort of drives, motivations, and sort of personal foibles, blank spots, and so on. And all our models of the world are lacking in. We none of us have a complete model of the world. And so that's why I kind of say, when I talk about excellence, I'm referring, and effectiveness, I'm referring to something, a quality within ourselves, which is that it's like a commitment. We have to commit to being personally effective. We got to commit to working on the skills and behaviors. Now, I would like to point out I'm a complete hypocrite, because for years I thought that if I just did X, Y would happen. And particularly, I probably could argue that I was kind of expecting that if I just worked hard, outcomes would happen. And in fact, the best part of my career was when I actually recognized that actually the number one thing is to work just as hard on my own skill base, which includes like the technical bit, like understanding what marketing effectiveness is, technical things like being able to write, technical things like being able to persuade and communicate, and also really getting into the detail of understanding what is marketing today, because we're kind of living in a golden age of marketing. And part of the reason I can say that is I've come from a pre and post. Remember, I've got two master's degrees and an undergraduate degree, all related to marketing. And what I can say categorically, the amount of information available for everybody here, the amount of knowledge available for us to improve our skills is incredible. And all you need to do is just take a look at the picture behind me here to show you all the amazing marketing books that have completely changed how it used to be. So instead of us just how we can think about marketing, because instead of us blundering around in the dark, we have a little more science-based thinking out there. So that's what I mean when I'm saying how to be an effective marketer. It's about you and your skills, it's about you and your persuasion ability, but it's also about you making a commitment to excellence.
Awesome. Very inspirational. And I guess even if you're stuck with a kind of slow team or slow company, you yourself can show up your best every day. And that's what this is about. And this kind of reminds me, and you talk about communication, um, about the power of language. You've discussed this before as well. Even just turning two words around, effective marketer to effective marketing, can have such a big impact on how people perceive what you're saying and how your messaging comes across. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's that there's we'll call this for the purpose of the podcast, the art of language, and the art of persuasion associated with language. But let's just start with language, and the English language, like many languages, but the English language is quite powerful but also quite subtle. And there's a lot of subtlety that we can draw from. Now, why should we understand our own language better? Because no matter who you are and what role you're in, what sort of like your status, or even what sort of where you are in the organization, the ability to communicate is incredibly important. And what's within the ability to communicate is an understanding of language. Now, we actually have known this for thousands of years. Some of you may have heard of the idea of the word rhetoric, and rhetoric is what they used to learn in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, which was kind of the art of using language to persuade. And so this is not something new. It's not as though I've come up with this idea. But the art of rhetoric is actually the art of persuasion, which is the art of what it is to be a marketing person, because it kind of doesn't matter how technically good you are if you are not able to convince and convert somebody to your way of thinking. And actually, we're always persuading. The best persuader in the world is a 2-year-old looking for some chocolate. We as humans are like it's kind of ingrained in our DNA to persuade. The funny bit about this kind of persuasion and language piece is that sometimes people are a little bit disdainful of me when I'm saying that. Though, so that sounds like manipulative and so on. But if you're up against a 2-year-old who's the best persuader and most manipulative individual in the world, you realize how important it is.
Great. I hope you're not telling us all that we just need to throw a tantrum in the supermarket and people will buy our product.
Well, I don't know about you, but
Uh,
that's worked for me for my whole life.
Great. Okay, so it's all about persuasion. Are you saying, okay, so you're saying that effective marketing comes down to your ability to successfully persuade your audience?
The Without the ability to persuade, you're sort of like working with two hands behind your back. And there's a couple of layers within the reason why I say that is, first of all, there's at a sort of one-to-one level. So many of us, whether we're mid-level, junior, or senior, we're not going to get a ton of time to go and communicate. Like if I'm talking to Jodi, the chief exec, and am I really going to get like 3 hours to get across my ideas and kick them back and forth and so on? That simply doesn't happen. In fact, one of the banes of my life was always I might have designed, some 30-page deck, which is, beautifully laid out in incredible sort of in my world anyway, in my view anyway, incredibly laid out, incredibly persuasive and communicative. And then I got told with a day to go that actually I've got 15 minutes and one page to communicate something that I've been thinking about for a year. And so this is why persuasion and language are important, because we actually have to compress our ideas into something that convinces somebody. The second reason why language is important, and this is kind of zooming out a little bit, is the idea of what I call abstractions. Well, in fact, I'll extend that out. We're living in a world of abstractions and algorithms. Now, prior to this, for most of since the dawn of humanity, if you will, we're used to kind of having things that we can touch and feel. So obviously, I've got my phone in front of me here, and I can touch it and feel it, and it's a thing, and it kind of exists, and it's hard, and it's got edges, and what have you. And if I go to my local store up the road, I can pick up my grocery, I can look at it, I can think about it, I can decide, I can touch and feel it, I can have an idea of what the size and shape of that is. So that's kind of real, it's concrete, if you will. But now as we move into a world of abstraction and algorithms, then we're moving into a completely different realm. And in fact, one of my recent keynotes, I was in Chile in South America recently. One of the metaphors I used during my presentations was this idea here, which is I put up the screen of my mobile phone, which is about 3 centimeters by 5 centimeters. And I said, this is now the entry point into the world. We're spending, and then I have a little bit of joke where I say, hey, how much time are you spending on your phone? And of course, the sheepish hands go up in the air to say, well, whatever, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours. And once we admitted to ourselves that the entry point to the universe of the world is this screen on a phone, then we kind of then have to extrapolate from that, which is The size and shape of the visuals on that, the words used in that, are actually now part of the art of communication, the art of persuasion. And it's kind of all a bit abstract. So if I'm looking at that aforementioned product, let's say it's a tin of beans, and in the supermarket, I can pick up the tin of beans, I can touch it, I can feel it, I can throw it at somebody. However, when I'm looking at the tin of beans on a screen that's 3 centimeters by 5 centimeters, well, then that's a completely different thing. It's an abstraction. It's not the thing. It's a version of the thing. And then the words to describe the tin of beans and the ingredients are another layer of abstraction, because I got to read them and go, oh, it's a thing, it does a thing, looks like a tin of beans to me, I guess so. And these are all abstractions, and obviously I'm using a sort of fairly trite example, like a tin of beans. But imagine trying to explain what marketing effectiveness is to a chief exec, when what we're talking about things as, how to say the laws of buyer demand, how we need to have continuously reach buyers all of the time, all this sort of stuff, amazing stuff. But it's an abstraction. It's just purely an idea. I can't touch it and feel it. The second point on that algorithm point I mentioned earlier, the person who's searching for a tin of beans on on an e-commerce site, could be on Tesco.com, it could be on Walmart.com, Coles.com if you're in Australia. You're searching the word beans, and a whole series of things appear that are beans like, if you will, because the algorithm is deciding what it means when you wrote the word beans in, which is completely different to the experience of me in my local shop, where I go to the bean section, pick it up. So even taxonomies, and how we describe things, are now super important. So abstractions and algorithms means we're working in our heads a lot more. We're thinking of the world through metaphors and thinking of the world through ideas. Therefore, persuasion now means we need to make things concrete, or as I like to say, sometimes, we need to make it up and make it real when we're talking to people.
Nice. Very philosophical. It reminds me of a kind of modern take on Schopenhauer's "The world as will and representation," honing in on that representation part. I think, especially in the English language, it's kind of known to just not have that many words. And so we have to kind of use more metaphors than most languages. And so it's kind of inbuilt in our language system that we're looking for meaning and looking for that representation. So, really interesting. To be a little bit less abstract and give our listeners something kind of more concrete to take away from this, I would love to start getting into more of the application side of things. If we've got this mindset of not only persuasion, but being concise and being effective and representing well, um, what can marketers do with that?
Well, the good thing is, as you pointed out, these abstractions are sort of metaphors, if you will, and that we're always looking for things like the thing, metaphorical descriptions and so on, as you put it. That actually helps us in another way, which is that if we have a simple framework to communicate, then it makes understanding a lot easier. So let me give you an example. I'm lucky enough to do a lot of teaching and training, as I mentioned earlier, and I did a class last week in a university on it was on marketing, obviously. And one of the tools I tell them is that in order to get your marketing plan and your marketing ideas across, you need a kind of a framework to communicate that. So the framework we discussed in the previous podcast was just talking about marketing strategy and setting up your objectives and what your goals are, and then moving that into product positioning, and move that into distribution, and ultimately into the channels that you choose. And the reason why that has a lot of resonance with people, because it's very easy to understand. Once I put the visual, which I like to call the one-page marketing plan, then people can understand that when I say things like, oh, why are you choosing, why are you talking to me about Facebook advertising, or why are you talking to me about Google advertising? Any problems you got are much more upstream of the fact that you haven't defined your strategy, or you haven't defined your objectives, or your product position is incorrect. And people intrinsically get that. But you'll see what I did just there. I called it the one-page marketing plan. And why did I call that? Because it's a little kind of thing to hook their mind into. So the thing I did last week was I used this other thing that people can hook their mind into. And I specifically tell them that this is for when you're talking to non-marketing people to try and communicate your plans. And a lot of these folks were digital marketing folks. So I was trying to help them kind of communicate so that they could put their project together, and they could also communicate during their work experience programs. So I call this model RACER. And the model is reach, acquire, convert, engage, retain. And that particular model, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, because a lot of it was inspired by amazing teachers like Dave Chaffee and so on. So I've extended it out a little bit more, but you'll see what's going on. First of all, I've got a phrase, or I think they call it mnemonic is the correct word, racer, which is very easy to understand and memorize. The second thing is I have another little kind of thing happening, which is that everybody knows I'm a motor racing fanatic and a car fanatic. So when you hear me talk about racer, they're like, oh, Colin, the guy's into racing. So we've got a double reason for them to memorize that topic. And then the idea of reach, acquire, convert, engage, retain is kind of like a little set of series of words that we can really understand. And what are each of these points here? So reach is my sort of umbrella term for defining, who your target market is, what's the positioning, segmentation, targeting, positioning. And so it's the work you do before you kind of make any decisions around what you're actually going to do. And it includes things like, the plans you want to create and so on. And so that's kind of, if you will, you're boxing off something in the reach piece. And then acquire is what channels are you going to use. Now, remember, in this case here, I'm mostly talking about digital marketing because that's what these students were. But it's by doing that, then you can say, well, we've got, say, Google AdWords as a channel. We got Meta advertising as a channel. We got TikTok advertising as a channel. We got email as a channel. And so you think about the world through these acquisition channels that you're making decisions to choose which one of those channels to acquire your customers. The next one obviously is is C for convert, so reach, acquire, convert. That's all the things you'll do, particularly say on a website, to help convince, convert a customer into being a customer, such as excellent product, persuasive language, great user experience, maybe personalized content, lots of payment opportunities, and so on. And that'll help convert the person. Engage is kind of put there as a sort of placeholder for everybody to think through how, in fact, things aren't quite a funnel in terms of customer decision making. Whereas, with Engage, we can use social media to reach people in an acquisition context, but also in a customer service context, but also to remind them that they've made the right decision, to act as content that can actually help people convert. So I actually use the engage kind of word as a way to remind people that we're living in a slightly different world now, where we're entering the world through the screen. We can use social to engage with people right across the customer journey. And the final piece then is retain, or retention. And that's just tools such as email, maybe loyalty programs, great customer service, call center, anything that helps keep the customer within our world. So we've used Racer because it's a way to remember things. It's a way to make it real for a listener. It's also a way to communicate a plan and make it alive for somebody. But it also helps you helping you convince people, because when you can box off a conversation into a topic, they can make the decisions. But if you keep talking about things in the abstract, then it makes it quite difficult. So this is why when I'm talking to people like this, they say to me, I found it really useful when talking to management, simply because they might ask a question, and I'm going to make this question up, but like, why don't we have a TikTok strategy? And then you can say, well, that's a great question. Now, TikTok is usable across a multiple different kind of strands of what our marketing could be as an organization. So first of all, if our target market is young people 18 to 30, so TikTok is perfect from a reach perspective. It's perfect positioning. It's a perfect product, if you will, for us to use it. Now we're going to use TikTok advertising to acquire customers. We're also going to use TikTok advertising to create content that will help move people into our funnel. We're also going to use TikTok as a sort of reminder, such as engagement, to remind those people about how good we are and so on. So now you see how TikTok fits into the racer model rather than, oh, we should use TikTok, I guess. Yeah, it lands it for people, if you will, if you have a framework to hang it off.
Okay, great. So not only is this a framework for persuading customers, it's persuading internal stakeholders as well, which is first step. And it's also a great framework to start your strategy, start thinking about your strategy, or if you're revising your strategy, looking at how each of your activity fits into these boxes. And it's kind of case in point about with the mnemonic
Mnemonic,
thing.
mnemonic, I think it is the correct word.
With a mnemonic, yeah, with the mnemonic as kind of the power of language and how you've kind of used a wordplay to represent all of these different aspects of what is a very complex task that is marketing. Um, so, how does language come into these? Does it come into these anymore? How would you think about language and or representation, some of the themes that you've talked about before using this model?
Well, excuse me. One of the key things here is, first of all, is a recognition that language is important, and if you start recognize the richness of language and speaking metaphors, it can really help you become essentially what I mean when I say the word articulate. When I'm talking about language, what I really want you to do is become articulate and persuasive. So part of that is actually recognizing your own communication style. Um, as an example, I've just done it there. I have a couple of verbal tics I put in what I'm saying. I sometimes extend my sentences out too long, or I'll say, and I just did it there as well, and I'll also maybe make a statement and then add something on it. I can distinctly remember, for example, doing job interviews over the year, and I'll be trying to impress people, and I'll be talking away, blah blah blah. Instead of shutting up, I would still go, and there's another thing, and blah 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 blah. And of course, then when I kind of reverse things and I ended up being the interviewer, I realized how ridiculous it sounds to keep kind of wedging more stuff into the sentence. So we have to recognize our own style. And one of the things I do is when I'm talking to people, and I'm very lucky, by the way, to get people ask me to how do I pull together some of my keynotes and my thoughts around my keynotes and how does that work? And part of the thing that's going on is as I'm speaking, I sort of have a parallel kind of train of thought going on in my mind. So as I'm talking, I'm looking to know where I'm going to finish that sentence, and ideally finish that sentence crisply. And the reason to finish the sentence crisply is that then the person listening believes that, well, they will receive that information as being more articulate rather than a person who's just kind of rambling and talking. And we all know ramblers and talkers. Perfectly fine if you're down with your mates down the pub on a Friday night, but in a professional environment, that's not quite what we're doing. And in fact, one of the um, constant kind of themes you will see over the years, particularly for people who want to grow and move up in an organization, is that many of these people have one key skill, which is the ability to persuade, the ability to be articulate and convince and convert. And that is a skill just as important as being able to read a balance sheet. So hence why I'm so passionate about it, and hence why it all starts with language as a sort of the key kind of sort of foothold into this world.
Yeah, definitely. So, presentation and kind of verbal communication comes into that language piece a lot, really, because that's where where it is the be all and end all if you're wanting to get a strategy over the line or persuade your stakeholders to invest in something that you're um, sure will work. You've mentioned a few tips on how marketers can quickly kind of think about their presentation style, such as verbal tics and elongated sentences. Are there any more that you might want to share?
Well, I've had to obviously do a lot of work on myself on this over the years, and I've got one thing that is like a really really powerful way to do this. So we all, as marketers, we'll all have to make presentations. We all can maybe be caught on the hoof and asked to speak, or we might have a formal thing to present a marketing plan at the end of the year. And I have this particular kind of thing that I get asked about, and I've kind of coalesced it into this kind of couple of ideas. So this is kind of a key way I think about communication. So first of all, it's much easier to communicate in threes, and people understand threes a lot easier. Yeah, maybe up as far as four, but like threes in principle are what really is a structure way to communicate. So that's the topic number one. Topic number two is the words are kind of less important than you would think. Vibes matter is the phrase I use in this context here. Now, why would I say that? I can guarantee the audience listening to this is not doesn't really remember what I said, 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, and so on. What they probably got was vibes, ideas, thoughts. That is, of course, assuming they weren't taking like lots of notes or using AI to transcript everything. But the principle is they don't remember the words; they remember the vibes. Now, the third bit of this is that we as humans, and in fact we said this a minute ago, is we're looking for structure to listen to the person to kind of map to our model of understanding of the world. So this is why I say for everybody here that the simplest thing to do is have a sort of three boxes. Now, if you're listening to this, if you listen to this in stereo, what I'm saying here is box one at the side, box two in the middle, and box three, and there's where your topics go into. So if you're asking me to speak about, say, a particular topic, one of the things I always say is a good kind of little hook to go and talk about is past, present, future. Jodi, you're here. We're talking about the podcast today, and in our previous podcast, we talked a lot about, particularly in marketing strategy, but where we want to move to today is really to actually build on that marketing strategy, build on the thinking that, and move it to the next level so that your listeners in the future can actually take that material and apply it very simply to their day-to-day working. Now, you see what I did there? I did a past, present, future sort of communication. I didn't know what I was going to say beforehand, but it sounded vaguely articulate because I had this model of three in my head of past, present, future. Yeah. And if we see those three boxes, part of the reason is that they're super powerful is you can kind of ask anybody can ask you any question, and you'll have a little framework in your head. So first of all, somebody asks you, X, and you can either look like, what's the word, a deer in headlights and say, oh, what do I say? Or you immediately click into, my answer is going to be in threes. I know the answer is not purely about the content. It's a little bit about how persuasively, forcefully, whatever language you want to use, I communicate that to them, and then how I land that articulately. So let's use this again. Hey, Colin, why aren't we on TikTok? Great question. Well, there's three reasons why TikTok. We can look at three ways to look at TikTok as part of our strategy. First of all, does this match to our target market? Is the person on TikTok matching to us? But judging from the fact we're targeting people over the age 50, I think maybe we're not. However, there's a second way to think about TikTok, which is it's really excellent for content, and it's really useful for us to actually get where it's picked up by other parts of social media, say like Twitter, which is where journalists are on. And if journalists are on Twitter and they see something on TikTok and they see that, that could actually be something useful to amplify our message. So we may not worry in the first part about our target market, but we may just be useful for TikTok as a communication tool. And finally, actually, it could just be something fun to lighten up our message and kind of make us a little more down with the zeitgeist at the moment. Now, I had no idea what I was going to say beforehand. I just randomly came up with the word TikTok, and I gave a roughly cohesive message. that was broken into three, just talking about TikTok. And you'll see there that kind of fairly sort of artificial way I answered it. It still sounded coherent just simply because I used this model of three. So, to our audience here, this is why I'm saying when we're talking about marketing strategy, when we're put on our feet, when we have to talk about our plans, break it up into a topic, which is typically three, sometimes four, and you can really land it because you can then kind of bring it through this flow of one, two, and three. It also means that if you take out your verbal tics, like I've tried to do, and you and so on, you realize that structure matters more than content, and structure makes you sound persuasive more than content.
Mm. Interesting. And it's not kind of, you're not just teaching us how to blag either, because that rule of three can also help organize your thoughts if you're put on the spot. And if you first think three, then that at least gives your brain something to cling on to when it's scrambling for any kind of content.
Mm.
So, great tip. Thank you for that. We've talked about a lot on this episode. I feel like we've covered a broad range of things from like kind of the philosophy of language to the art of persuasion and the mindset of persuasion to convincing stakeholders and tips on making your language and structure and persuasion even better. So, thank you for sharing all of your thoughts today, Colin. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for letting me chat about some of the things that I'm really passionate about. And the reason I'm speaking so passionately about these things is these are sort of like, as I said earlier, the platform, the foothold to build a great career. Separate to obviously creating marketing excellent, being an excellent marketer is actually how you build a great marketing career.
Agreed. Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.